All right, so the last thing for us to do is the derivatives of our inverse trig functions. You do not need to memorize these. If we restrict the domain of our trig functions so that they're one-to-one, so that they pass the horizontal line test, then they'll have inverses. And these are the traditional standard domain restrictions for our trig functions. Switching the ordered pairs to x comma y gives us that inverse trig function. I think it's just nice to look at the graphs. So what we're about to do is we're about to prove for my cosine, inverse cosine function, what the slope of the tangent line, what the derivative is at any point on that curve. But I just thought it would be nice in our notes to have a picture of inverse sine, which some books also write as arc sine, as well as inverse cosine, arc cosine, and inverse tangent, arc tan. Okay, so here are the derivative rules. And again, you do not have to memorize them. And we are going to go ahead and prove the derivative of inverse cosine is -1 all over the square root of 1 minus x squared. So what that's saying is the slope of the tangent line at any point on this curve is -1 divided by the square root of 1 minus the x coordinate squared there on that curve. So we're about to prove this one using implicit differentiation. All right, so first let's let y be inverse cosine of x. Then the equivalent statement is the cosine of y is x. If I take the cosine of both sides, cosine of inverse cosine of x is just x. And now I'm going to do my implicit differentiation. Again, step one is to take the derivative of both sides with respect to x. I'm not taking the derivatives yet, I'm just writing that that's what I'm about to do. The derivative of cosine of stuff, I'm going to be using chain rule here. The derivative of cosine is minus sine of that thing, chain rule, times the derivative of that thing, derivative of the inside function. The derivative of x with respect to x is just 1. Step 2 is solving for that y prime. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. I just realized I spelled steps wrong up here. Let's fix that. Step 2, we're going to go ahead and solve for y prime. Sine of y is one object, right? So I've got minus sine of y times y prime. I'm just going to divide both sides by minus sine of y, and we have it. Y prime is equal to 1 all over minus sine of y. Now you're saying, possibly to yourself, if y was the inverse cosine, y prime is the derivative of inverse cosine, and that sure looks different than this. But that's because we haven't gotten it all in terms of x. To do that, we're just going to do a little bit of right triangle trig using our Pythagorean theorem to figure out what the sine of y should be. So let's just have a little bit of scratch over here. We know that the cosine of y is x. Yeah? Just rewrote that. Specifically, it's x if you want x over 1. And cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. If you like the acronym SOHCAHTOA, it's helpful to get cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a right triangle. Y here is my angle. Cosine of y is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is x and hypotenuse is 1. And then the question is, what is the third side? And we know how the sides of these this triangle are related to each other. That is with my good old Pythagorean theorem. I know x squared plus the thing I'm looking for squared is equal to 1 squared. Okay. 1 squared is just 1. I'm going to go ahead and subtract x squared from both sides. And we have that the thing I'm looking for, apologize on the color, there we go. The thing I'm looking for squared is just equal to 1 squared, which is 1, minus x squared. So this side is the square root of, taking the square root of both sides, the square root of 1 minus x squared. Let's go ahead and write that. So now I can go ahead and answer this question, what on earth is the sine of y? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so opposite is square root of 1 minus x squared over hypotenuse. Hypotenuse is 1. How about 1 over minus 1 is minus 1. Sine of y. What on earth is the sine of y? We just answered that. The sine of y is opposite square root of 1 minus x squared divided by hypotenuse divided by 1. Another meeting, sorry. Divided by 1 is just itself. And there we have it. That is what we have written right up here. If y is inverse cosine, y prime is minus 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus x squared. Right here.